Alright, ask yourself this question. Which one of these two protagonists would you consider to be better? Do you think that Bella Swan is better than Maximus, or do you think that Maximus from The Gladiator is better than Bella Swan from Twilight? Now here is something I've got for you, okay? These two protagonists, no matter how you think of them, generally speaking, the public perceive Maximus to be better than Bella Swan. Basically, Bella Swan is terrible, and she is terrible for very few specific reasons, alright? One of those reasons is the fact that she does not develop. And I'm here to tell you, right? Development is extremely overrated. You do not need character development in order to write a protagonist that is considered good. Do you know why? Because Maximus himself, even though likely you have answered the question I asked you in the beginning that Maximus is better than Bella Swan, both of them go through one type of development that is called external development. The internal development is zero. So ask yourself the question, how come you consider Maximus better? Or how come generally in the public people consider Maximus to be the better protagonist? And here is the reason why. But before I do that, I want you to do a favor for me, okay? I want you to imagine yourself as a writer. You are an aspiring author and you have just started your journey to become a published author or a famous, screenplay or novelist or, playwright, whatever, okay? You want to learn how to develop your character. Let's say you create a protagonist. Your protagonist can have three of general, types of development. The first type of development is that the positive protagonist. In other words, there is something and your protagonist, they learn that thing and they go on a journey to become the better person. In other words, for instance, your protagonist in this particular case is the student, okay? The student is the person who learns something new, okay? Not necessarily physically, we're talking about internal development, okay? And so internally, your protagonist is the student and they learn something. And then there is the second type of protagonist you can create. And this one is actually very intuitive. If there is a student, there must be a teacher. So you can either make your protagonist the student or you can make your protagonist the teacher, okay? In this particular case, your protagonist does not really change internally. Instead, they are going on a journey to fix something, to teach someone else, to maybe restore their country, to fight the evil. Or for instance, Maximus in The Gladiator, he is the teacher. And who is he teaching? In this particular case, it's very large, it's a huge spectacle. He is teaching Rome. Even though I'm not really a fan of the Hunger Games, yes, Katniss Everdeen is the perfect example of the teacher, okay? Your protagonist can also be the third type of protagonist. And this particular type of protagonist is my favorite. And this is, for instance, showcased in Godfather. And this particular protagonist, what happens to them, in my culture for instance, we call them the devil, okay? And the devil comes in many forms. In particular, your protagonist loses the truth. So for instance, imagine if Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games, for instance, all of a sudden decided that she does not want to, for instance, do all the good things that she's doing, and she goes maybe with the creators, or she works for the capital in order for them to maintain their sick, oligarchy. And that is the gist of the three main types of protagonists that you can have. Now we have come back to the beginning of the video, which is why do they consider Maximus good, Bella Swan bad, even though both of these protagonists do not change internally and the only change that happens to them is external. What makes a good protagonist, if you actually think about it, is literally the meaning of the word protagonist. If you Google synonyms for the word protagonist, you will find words such as, promoter or champion. In other words, what makes a good protagonist is not someone that develops internally or someone that develops externally. You could literally have your protagonist not change in societal hierarchy as well as internal personality and who they are throughout the story, and you could still 100% end up with a story where you have a protagonist that is, generally speaking, in the public considered good. For instance, let's take James Bond. I have not seen countless people, as there seems to be with Bella Swan, complaining about James Bond and saying that he's a terrible protagonist. Whereas, for instance, other protagonists like Bella Swan, you'll just find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of essays literally bashing this particular story. And here's why. What makes a good protagonist is not whether they develop, it's not whether they teach someone, it's not whether they change the country. It is the following, however. Because to have a good protagonist, you have to have someone who champions the story. You have to have a protagonist that promotes the story. In final words, the protagonist that is good and the protagonist that is bad, between all of these different types of protagonists, is the one who moves the story along. They need to take the story by the throat and they need to move it forward. When you are following all of these, nonsensical Tom Cruise protagonists, right? All the characters I have seen Tom Cruise play, all of them do not change. All of them do not literally change in both ways, right? They do not change internally or externally. And they are still considered good if you really think about it. Therefore, to have a good protagonist that is interesting, that is engaging, that the people will like, you do not have to have a protagonist that develops, but you have to have a protagonist that moves the story along. The reason why we consider Bella Swan to be a terrible protagonist is because she is a swoon. She does not move the story forward. Therefore, she is a boring protagonist. Even if she develops internally, even if she develops externally, people will still think that she is a terrible protagonist. Compare her to someone like Katniss Everdeen, who does not really change internally, but she does change externally. Number 2, she does change those who are around her. And number 3, she takes the story by the throat. She literally volunteers in place of her sister. And so you have to understand, in order to have an engaging protagonist, you do not need to have change. You do not need to have any form of change. All you need to do is make sure that your protagonist is moving the story forward. That's it. It's that simple. I've had my point. Have a nice day. Oh, I forgot. Please subscribe and like this video. Thank you. And if you enjoyed, have a nice day.